I remember being in Gothenburg the year that the guitar Mongoloid came out, and you guys won a prize. And that's the only one of your 5 features I haven't yet seen. But are the themes that are of interest to you that show up in the other films, are they there in Guitar Mongoloid as well?
I think that, I think that I have always been interested in sociology. And I think that there's a little bit of a sociological approach in the themes in all the films, that you are, to make a comparison, is that if you have a nature filmer that is like filming animals, you're filming them with from in a voyeuristic way. You're like watching them doing things and not judging. And I think that I have had a little bit of the same approach. That what I love about sociology is that sociologists get interested in when we fail. And when we fail, there's like some experience that we can take out of that and learn something out of it. And I like the same thing, to try to create setups where we can look on, where I would feel like, oh, I would have a hard time to handle this situation myself. And I maybe would fail myself to live up to my ideals, or live up to my morale, etc., etc. And that, I think, is like maybe something that is like a red thread through my films, that all the situations that I'm interested in is like a dilemma. A dilemma is that you have 2 or more choices, but none of them are easy. And all of them will have consequences. And I mean, a dilemma is something that is used very often in a Greek drama. And then the dilemma is used in a way, put our behavior into a context, so we understand that we behave out of the situation, not because that is individually very different personalities in us. Actually, that the context is deciding so much on how we behave.
Because when I interviewed you before Cannes, you told a story about, I think I asked you why about your interest in social behavior and group dynamics, and you told an interesting story about your mother and when you were growing up.
Well, my mother, she was a teacher, and she was teaching grade 1 to grade 3, so between 7 and 9 years old pupils. And she told me, I think I was around 16 years or something, she told me that she had an experiment, a sociological experiment with her students, and it was the Solomon Asch conformity test. I don't know if you know which one it is. It is the one when you have 2 lines, and one is a little bit longer and one is a little bit shorter. And then you have one person that is taking out to do this experiment, and then you have a collective or a group sitting there, and you're asking this person, like, which line is the longest? And then, of course, it's very easy to see which one is the longest, and the student is pointing on the longest one. And then she turned over the question to the group. Okay, which one do you say is the longest one? And they always say the other line is the longest one. So they say that the shortest line is the longest one. And the conformity test is to show like how quickly we are starting to point on the shortest line in order to not be excluded from the group. And that was a test she did, and I remember when she told me about it, and I thought it was like, oh, isn't it a little bit harsh to do that to kids that are 9 years old, And she did it in order to, to make an example and to show group dynamics and how group dynamics is affecting us. So that was a strong memory, and
And certainly group dynamics are an important part of this film and your other films as well.
Yes, I think that one film that really where I think that I was investigating that theme was a film called Involuntary, where it was like 5 different groups and 5 different situations where we tried to avoid losing face in front of our group. And I can just tell you briefly about one of the situations that I think is quite funny, but it's also a good example from the film, or it tells a little bit about the film and the humor that I'm like reaching for at the same time. And it is about someone that is going on a bus, on a long term, what do you say, long trip bus, or long distance bus, yeah. and she goes to the toilet in this bus, and then the bus is like rocking a little bit, so she pulls down the curtain. She breaks a small curtain that is for a small window in this toilet. And she's trying to put up this little curtain and doesn't really succeed, so she doesn't think that much about it, so she leaves it and goes back to her seat. And then this bus, it makes a stop, and everybody goes out to have lunch. And when they come back, then the bus driver is really upset. And he's aiming for a group of youngsters in the back of the bus, and he's saying, okay, you can have fun and you can play music, but you can't break things here. And then this woman, she like, is he talking about this curtain? You know, and he's really, really angry, and okay, but she's thinking, okay, this will be over soon, you know, and suddenly it comes up, it is the curtain that he's talking about. But she keeps her mouth shut, she doesn't say anything. And she was thinking, now soon we will be on the road again. And the bus driver, he goes back behind the wheels, and instead of driving, he turns off the engine. And he takes the microphone and he says, okay, I won't go anywhere before the one who did this confesses. And it is like, I love this situation, because that's a typical dilemma. You know, you have two choices. Either you can say, hello, it was me, I'm sorry. But then it's strange that you didn't do it before. So it's not very easy to do that. And you can also keep your mouth shut and sit there and pretend like nothing have happened. This situation is also something that talks a little bit about my working process, because this happened to a friend of mine, and he told me this story, and I thought it was hilarious. So I always like look for these small situations, very much like stand-up comedy. You know, like you have something that you can easily identify with, but you realize it's hard to handle. And that was really, for me, involuntary was really the one where I really started to investigate like social behavior and group dynamics and a behavioristic approach rather than having a psychological approach to the characters. Like our behavior is changing so much dependent on which context we are in. And yeah.
It's very provocative the way you do that in play. The one with the kids at the mall and the older boys that steal their cell phones.
I can tell you a little bit about Play. And Play started a debate in Sweden, and it was a controversy around that film. A lot of people were talking about it since the setup of the film. The setup of the film was inspired of a certain kind of events that took place in Gothenburg, in the city where I live in. And it was a group of young boys that were robbing other young boys in the center of the city, in a mall, in a big mall. And these robberies took place for a long, long time. And I think that the robbers were between, like, you know, they were 12 to 14 or something like that. And they robbed other kids that were in the city to, you know, buy a computer game or do something like that. And it's interesting with these malls in the center of the city, because that's really where you meet all the different kind of people that lives in Göteborg. So if you come from a nice suburb, or like more, the one that you don't have that much education and that much money, all of them meet in that center. And the robbers that did the robberies, they had one thing in common, and it was that they were black. So then you have a kind of like a controversial image: 5 black boys robbing 3 white boys. And that was the setup of the film. And then I think that you can ask yourself why you choose to do a film like that. But for me, it was, I realized that I wanted to do that when I was doing an interview with one of the robbers, when I was doing the research. And then he told me that they were really, really aware of how to use the stereotype, the stigmatized stereotype of the black man in order to create an unoutspoken threat when they were doing these robberies. So they were playing the role of the black man, the dangerous black man. And this role was something that, of course, they have adapted very much from media. So that was one of the reasons that I did that film. But I also can tell you, but when we did this film, Play, that was actually when the idea about the square started. Because what you could tell when I read through the court files of these robberies was that the bystander effect, I don't know if you are familiar with the bystander effect. The bystander effect is that we have very hard to take responsibility when we are in public spaces because we don't know who is in charge. So we are like, instead of like, when I'm seeing something happen on the other side of the street, instead of I do something, I think like, but you should do something, you are closer. And then what happens is that no one is doing anything. And there are a lot of sociological experiments showing that the more people we are in a room, the slower we react. The more people we are in the square, the slower we react. And one example that I can take from that, they did one experiment, sociological experiment, where there were students doing a test, sitting and writing like this. And it's an important school test that you do in Sweden. And then they let in smoke under a door in the back of that room. And then they measured how quick the reaction is based on how many people you are in the room. So if you are 3 people in the room and you're sitting there writing, then you're like, wait, it's smoke there, hey. Then very quickly you are like taking action. But if you are 300 people, then people are writing, and then they're looking back, and they see the smoke, and then they look at the other people around, and then they continue writing. And this is the bystander effect, that we get slow in the brain, actually, when we a lot of people. And so these robberies that took place in the mall in Göteborg, there were so few occasions that any adult interacted. That intervened, yeah, and tried to help the kids. And the kids didn't ask for help either. So, and this happened for 3 years, those robberies, and in broad daylight. And sometimes it was like adult people just like 1 or 2 meters away passing by. And then I talked to my father about this. I told my father about this, and it became also a scene in the film. You will probably remember it, but I told my father about this, and then he told me that when he was 6 years old, then he was brought up in Stockholm, and this was in the 50s. And he was brought up in the center of Stockholm. When he was 6 years old, when he was supposed to go out and play, his parents put an address tag in his jacket, around his neck, like the address to the apartment. And then he sent them out, and like he could play all alone. And if you compare that attitude towards other human beings, that attitude change that have happened. Like back then, you looked at other adult as someone that would help the children if they ended up in trouble. And also other adult was someone that was responsible of the upbringing of all children in society. But if I compare that on the attitude that I have to other adults today, even if I want to be, an open person, it's almost that I teach my daughters, be a little bit aware of other adults. And if you're going to ask someone for help, ask a mother or a woman that have kids. So men are potential pedophiles almost. So it's something about the paranoia, because if you look at the statistics when it comes to, for example, criminality in Göteborg, the city where I live in, and also in Stockholm, it have decreased, it have not increased. So society have become safer, but we have become more scared of each other. And for me, when we were doing that film about these robberies, then it was obvious, at least I thought it was obvious, the reason that the adults' world and the kids' world are taking place on 2 parallel levels. There's no connection in between them. This is one of the reasons that it is like this. And we were talking about Roy Andersson and the producer of Roy Andersson that also was on the film school. Then me and this producer, we came up with an idea that we wanted to create a symbolic place where we are reminded of our role as fellow human beings, for example, in a public space. And this symbolic place became like a square, like a white marked square. And it should have like a very, very simple rule to it. Like if someone is standing in the square, then it's my obligation to address this person and say, you are standing in the square, how can I help you? So in a way to try to break the bystander effect, break that we are getting passive and that we have no connection in between each other in the cities. And we don't know, like, it's not like in a small neighborhood, you know, it's like the bigger city it is, the more distance it is between us. And how do we break that distance? And
you've actually set up the square as an art project in several cities, right?
Yes, and that happened later on because we thought it was a great idea. And I think it's interesting, sometimes when I talk about this idea, some people think it's a little bit, you know, it's naive. You know, how can we create these agreements? But then I think that we can look at something that is, for an example, a pedestrian crossing. You know, with a couple of lines in the street, we actually have made an agreement that car drivers should be careful with the pedestrians. It's kind of a fantastic invention, actually. And it's also kind of fantastic that we actually obey these rules, that we agree on these rules. And so the traffic rules is something that I think is kind of inspiring. You know, that actually we are driving on the right side of the road. And isn't it fantastic? All of us are driving on the right side of the road because it's an agreement that we have. And I think that we can create these kind of agreements also when it comes to other things. For an example, humanistic values. We can remind ourselves, with this symbolic place, I get reminded of humanistic values. And I think the church have had this role for many years, of course. But these kind of agreements, I think it's interesting if you look at Sweden, for example. You know, in 1967, in one night, we changed from left-hand traffic to right-hand traffic. So like, okay, tomorrow, Sweden, we are going to change to right-hand traffic. And it worked perfectly. And there was less accidents that weekend than it was like the previous weekend, and et cetera, et cetera. So when it comes to these kind of agreements that we can make together in order to, how do you say, collectively, can you say like that? Yeah, work together on something. That is definitely one of the, like, this, how do you say, the specific things about human beings, I would say. And so this idea was like that. It was not like, okay, it was not like an art piece, because I thought that if it's an art piece, if it's an art installation, then it's like, should I stand and look at it for a while and then walk away, you know? It was more interesting if it was like a humanistic traffic sign. And then me and Eric, we did this film, Force Majeure. And when that film was finished, I still couldn't forget this idea about this symbolic place. Because there is something about it. I thought it was something about it. And I started to think, okay, I want to write a script about these themes. And it's a kamikaze project to write something about this, I would say, in some ways. You know, it's, how do you write about, I mean, it's a starting point of the civilization. Like the idea, what should we be as human beings, these humanistic values. How do you write something interesting about this very conceptual idea? And I started to collect different scenes. I was talking to a lot of people about the themes, and they told me different stories. For an example, one story that was told to me when I was doing the research was the story with the beggar. And it was my ex-wife that told me that story. There was a beggar sitting outside the block where she lives. Yeah, and she gives something every day to this beggar. And one day she doesn't have any cash. So she says, I can go and buy something in the cafeteria if you want to, because I don't have any cash today. And the beggar goes, yeah, a chicken ciabatta, please. And I thought it's a dilemma, again, you know. Should I go and buy a chicken ciabatta now and give it? But then, like, you have demands on me. You should be down there. You're a beggar. I'm up here. You know, it's something, it points out the hierarchy. And it points out also, I think, the hopeless idea of begging. You know, that me as an individual, I actually can't change this person's life by giving a couple of coins in making me feeling better. It makes me feel better, but I will never change your situation. And that if you look at Sweden, I think Sweden is interesting when it comes to begging, because it's a kind of new phenomenon for us. We were a little bit shocked when it suddenly came Romanian people to Sweden and started to beg on the street. And this was because they opened up the borders of the European Union. And from the beginning we were talking about like, okay, come on, there are people on the street sitting there begging. Why doesn't the state do anything? How can we accept this? Hello, where is the state? Why are you not taking responsibility for this? But very quickly we stopped talking about it as a society problem and brought it down into like an individual problem. So it's like, do you give or don't you give a beggar? And you put the guilt on the individual. And we stopped talking about it as a society problem. And in that moment it was like, okay, now we can't do anything about this anymore. So, and these kind of scenes I was collecting.
The public space of the street as the curator goes to work, in a way it's kind of like play, or the Good Samaritan experiment, where he's robbed and the reactions of the people against the woman that's screaming.
Yeah, that's actually something that happened to me. But it was not a robbery when it happened to me. But I can tell you about the situation. But I also want to go back then and talk about the square, because the square became like a little movement in Sweden. But I will talk more about that later. But should I tell you about the robbery? Because the robbery was also seen like that. You know, when you meet someone on the street and you don't know in which way the social contract looks like. You know, because I was going from my office where I lived. No, from my apartment to my office. I can walk between my apartment and my office. And I'm walking on like a small picturesque street, super cute street, where there are a lot of small shops. And there's a lot of people there. And I'm walking on this street and suddenly I can hear a woman scream, "Help!" And help is an interesting word, because help points out, it's like pointing out everybody, but also me individually. If someone is calling help, then it's like, I should do something, you know? And you could see, like, I was walking with all these people, and when they call help, you know, you immediately feel like a reaction in like people's bodies. They're like starting to look a little bit, you know? And then when they don't see anything, they continue walking. And then you hear help again, and it's even louder. And finally we have to stop up on the street, you know, and I'm stopping up and I'm trying to look down the street. And after a while I see a woman that looks completely in panic. And she's screaming, "Help, help!" And she's running, like coming running towards me. And she's running, passing me, like with 1 meter, and runs straight up in the arms of a guy that is standing next to me and grabbing his shoulders and like, "You gotta help me, you gotta help me. He's going to kill me." Everybody on this spot gets really scared, of course, what is going on, you know. And this guy that had this woman in his arms, he's like starting to look around and like, you know, what should I do? And then we hear a man screaming from the same direction that this woman came from, and it sounds like a complete madman, you know. And this guy that has this woman in his arms is getting even more nervous. But then suddenly he sees me, and then he says, like, turns over to me and says, "Hey, you are backing me up now, right?" And this is also a little dilemma, of course. You know, should I join that guy? But you know, oh, it's someone coming there. It's not easy, and I can't walk away either. So I actually have to join him, and we're standing shoulder to shoulder and having this woman behind us. And after a while, we see this man coming running towards us. And it's like you are completely full of adrenaline, and you are like, you know, lowering your body position in order to take the impact. And luckily, this guy is not aggressive towards us, so we can hold him back and take this woman to leave the spot. But there was a reason that I remember this, because what this guy did was that he was like grabbing someone else and saying, hey, we should do something together now. And that is, of course, a very efficient way of breaking the bystander effect. Because I was completely paralyzed. I was like, I don't want to be involved in this, you know. And then he's like, hey, you are backing me up now, right? And if you look at the bystander effect, what sociology does is like to give us examples that makes us able to break the bystander effect, for an example. So to grab another human being when we are in this situation, when we suddenly feel paralyzed, is a very efficient way to do it. So this is like another example of a scene. And I mean, I would say that many of the scenes in the film is scenes that I have experienced myself or someone else experienced. Oh my God, now I'm talking for a long time here. But anyway, in order to get back to the square, because the square was there, and at the same time that we were writing the script, then there was a museum in a city that invited my friend Kalle to make an exhibition. And he said, shouldn't we make an exhibition with the square? Yeah, so everything was like starting in that way.
Can you talk a little bit about how you work with the actors? I heard an interview with Elizabeth Moss on TV where she sounded almost a little alarmed about how you work, but pleased with the results. Is the script set in stone? Is there a lot of improv?
No, I mean, I think that what we do when we are on shooting is that I have had like 68 shooting days on the square, which will, at least in Sweden, is probably double the amount of shooting days. And an average, I think an average is 30 or something shooting days. So what we do when we have a lot of time on set, and what we do is like when you have put up the camera and you're starting to look on what's happening in front of the camera, we have read the script and we have talked about the script and we are trying to, try out the scene. And the scene is like almost like flags that you are supposed to, the script is like flags that you're going around and you have to come to the end. But you're allowed to go wherever you want in between. So what we do in the beginning of the day is like to try to investigate the scene, try out the scene. And that we have time to try it out, and we can take risks. So the actors can take risks. They can do things that they might think is silly. But sometimes those silly things are the best things, I think. And then we can say, I'll keep that and take away that. So it's like taking the script and starting to visualize it and try to look at it. Because so often there's things in the script that doesn't work when you are looking at it, when it's suddenly happening in front of the camera. And then we repeat over and over again. And I think in average in this film we did like around 30, 40 takes or something on every camera position. And then in the end of the day we go like, okay, 5 takes left, are everybody ready? And then you do a countdown, 4 takes left. You're trying to push in some intensity in these 5 last takes. So it's a combination of repeating things so you get, like almost that you get a muscle memory out of it. And then you are like, okay, now is the time when we're going. It's an important football game and we're going to win it together now.
How about shooting the dinner scene in the museum at the gala benefit? How many days did you shoot that, and what did the extras know about what was going to happen?
No, we shot it during 4 days, and it was Terry Nortery. He's an actor that lives in LA that I was working with, and the last films he have been into is, for example, Planet of the Apes. And the Kong Skull Island, I think it's called. And what he does is, he's a motion capture artist, and he has like these green dots on him, and he's super skillful in imitating monkeys. There's a fantastic YouTube clip of Terry Notary that I think that you should check up if you're into YouTube, where he's like doing a demo and showing how he worked with Planet of the Apes. And then he has these arm extensions, and then he says like, okay, this is a chimpanzee, and then he walks exactly like a chimpanzee. It's fantastic to see it because it's so striking. And then he says, okay, and this is a gorilla. And then he walks exactly like a gorilla. So it's a form of acting that is really, really direct. You know, even a child can say, which one is the best actor in imitating a gorilla? Even a child can point that out, you know? So it's a very direct form of acting. And so the first day what we did, because we had 4 days of shooting of this scene, the first day we were looking at Terry's movement when he was moving around in the room, because we were trying to figure out how we should capture the performance that he does and that he's so skillful in it. And then we had 3 days of shooting. And the audience that is in this room, the extras, a lot of them are coming from the art scene in Sweden. So they're like curators and art critics, and they have a very specific look. You can tell that they have been practicing playing the role for many, many years. You know? And also how they dress and all attributes and everything like that. It's very hard to copy that. You know, someone have to be very skillful. So there was the audience was really part of the elite when it comes to contemporary art in Sweden. And during the first shooting day, I didn't tell them what was going to happen. So we play this voiceover that is in the film, you know, soon you will be confronted by a wild animal. As you all know, the hunting instinct is triggered by weakness. If you show fear, the animal will sense it. If you try to escape, the animal will hunt you down. But if you remain perfectly still, without moving a muscle, then you can hide in the herd, safe in the knowledge that someone else will be the prey. And that is actually, it's the bystander effect that voiceover is like describing in some ways. So they were listening to this voiceover, and they were sitting there in their tuxedos. And and then after a while, like the door is opening up, and then comes Terry Notary into the room. And what I did was that I was recording the reactions, the sound of the reactions of the audience. Because that first reaction that they get when they like start laughing and get scared and things like that, it's kind of hard to play that in an authentic way. So the first reaction, so I recorded the sound and then I used the sound in the editing. But after that, we started to do like repeat over and over and over again, and did like in the average 25 takes on that scene, every camera setup. So then yeah.
And this was the first time you were working with English-speaking actors. How would you like to direct an
with Terry, it
film?
was very easy because there's no dialogue at all.
Yeah. Elizabeth is great in this.
Yeah.
And the sex scene, the scene in the bedroom is amazing.
Yeah. That's a friend of mine that have experienced that scene. I have not experienced that. But I think that Elizabeth, it was really, I met her for an improvisation in London, and it was for the dialogue, you know, in the scene. That is when they are standing next to this chair installation that is making all these awkward sounds. And I love the dialogue of that scene because it's a great scene to try out with actors, because the opening line is like, so how should we solve this? And that's Elizabeth's opening line. And then Christian goes like, solve what? And she goes like, yeah, what have happened between us? And it's like, have something happened between us? You know, and they are like just talking about this big elephant that is in the room, but none of them are like daring to touch the subject, basically. So I tried it out with her, and she was, I must say really that I think that Elizabeth Moss is one of the most intelligent actors that I have been working with, because she knows how to use a setup of a scene and use the, how do you say, the mechanism, can you say like that, in a scene, in order to, you know, push the other actor in different directions, and she did it in such a beautiful way. And I didn't want to have an English-speaking actor in the film, but when she did it in such a brilliant way, I just felt okay, I have to give it to her, and I thought it's okay because it's the art scene. We accept that they are talking a lot of different languages, you know. So, but I can tell you a little bit about that dialogue scene when we shot it, because it was quite funny. Because this sound, I love the idea that it's like an art piece making this silly sound, and that it should interrupt them when it was the most awkward. In the most awkward moments, you know. And when we were shooting that scene, then I was sitting with they have put up like these buttons for me, so I could like push on the button, and then it's like. So I was like sitting behind the monitor, you know, and following the dialogue, and then okay, this is a perfect place, you know. And then you have to be silent. So that was really fun. Once again, when it's hard to handle, then it becomes interesting. So.
And did a friend of yours also have a bonobo running around their house?
Sorry.
Did any friend of yours ever go to someone's house that had a bonobo running, a bonobo running around their house?
No, but that, I can tell you how that idea came up. It's also fun. It's also fun to talk transparent about the films. I think, you know, that you're like really telling the truth about when you make a film, because it's so easy to make myths about what does the monkey mean and what is the monkey a metaphor for something or like that. It's not like that at all. Because it was like me and Eric, we were in Gothenburg, and we knew that like, in 3 months we will start shooting this film. And we had just read through the script, and we just felt something is missing. There's something about the script that it's a little bit too, how to say, you know, when you have watched like half an hour, then you realize that how this film would play out, and you will not surprise the audience in any way. And we went away for a weekend and trying to figure out what is it that we need to add. And we were like talking and talking and talking, and we never really got to any conclusion. We didn't get to any answer. And then just before we were supposed to get on the train and go back to Gothenburg, then I don't know how it came up, but like, shouldn't Elizabeth have a monkey at home? And it was so funny because we were so happy when we got up with that idea. And we were like, you know, every film needs a monkey. And I love when the monkey comes into the film, because it's like there's an agreement between the audience and the movie, and suddenly it comes this chimpanzee into the room, and like no one is really talking about it or doing anything about it. So the contract is completely broken. And anything can happen in the film after that, right? There's like nothing that not can happen in the film after that. So it's suddenly you have made the film more insecure, and you have to like, okay, maybe I have to, you know, try to follow this film now. At least that was the idea.
So now I want to open it up to the audience and see if there's some questions. Yeah, over here.
You just totally dashed all my emotions and thoughts going on about the monkey. I totally thought Elizabeth Moss's monkey was gentle, quiet, and, you know, took care of itself and didn't create any chaos. Yet the man who played the monkey was chaotic and violent. And that it had, you were talking about social, you know, so I really think maybe somewhere inside of you, not even thinking about it, may have had some feelings about that.
She's making an interesting comment comparing the Elizabeth Moss's monkey to Terry Notary's monkey character.
But that, of course, was something that after the idea came up, then it's like, okay, and then we have the monkey performance in the film, and is there a connection between them? And I think that, of course, a monkey in itself, I think that why is it interesting to look at monkeys? I think I believe that it's interesting because we are reflecting ourselves in the monkeys. But the monkeys, they are not ashamed of their instinct and their needs. So they don't have to deal with all the culture that human beings have to deal with constantly. And we constantly have to deal with our outside perspective of ourselves. So we constantly look at ourselves, am I like fitting into this group? Am I, you know, and the monkey is like in some ways free, but also it has to deal with a complete different, how do you say, more insecure culture, so to speak. We have a more civilized side.
Right.
And the monkey maybe can reflect that we also are animals. We shouldn't forget that we are animals. So yeah.
Yeah.
And one over here.
Given the recent sexual misconduct in Hollywood, is it just a coincidence that the curator says to his subordinate, Elizabeth Moss, but you were attracted to me sexually because of my power?
She's asking a question, comparing to current events and saying that, is it a coincidence that, but she's actually not his subordinate, she's a journalist, but she's asking about the male coming on to Elizabeth
No, but
Moss.
I can tell you there was a Swedish book that came out like, was it 3 years ago or something, that was about a journalist that, it's a fiction book, but the people that know these people knows that it's also inspired of true events. And this book was about a female journalist that fell in love with a male director that was like a high status person, much older, etc., etc. And this book was a lot about their relationship and about like him and in his power situation. In if he's using his power or not. Doesn't she understand how he uses his power, etc., etc.? Is she naive, or etc.? That was really what the book was about, and it's a brilliant book. It's really, I like it a lot, and I'm a very good friend with the director that is in the book. You know, and I also know the author that have written the book. So it was so interesting to see the things going on in the book and thinking about those two people that I know, both of them, and I'm like them, both of them, you know. So, of course, there's things that is reminding about the things going on now, but there are also some difference when it comes to the abuse of power, or what do you say? At least in the event that the book was based on. But yeah, but this book was discussed a lot in the public media, in media when it came out. It was debated really, really much. So, and I think that also, when this Me Too thing started, made Me Too to have a super impact on Sweden. But the film was already shot and it was already all these things. But I 100% agree that of course you start to think about these.
Well, did he use his power specifically to lure her into bed? I mean, it was consensual sex, but still, he made a point of saying.
What I think about that, if he used his power or not.
He mentions you're attracted to my power.
Yeah, I think he did, yes. And I think that she was, in this book, I think the setup was that, and I also think it is like this in this scene, is that she is interested in him. And when they meet again, and she says, how should we solve this? Then what she would like to say is that, I like you, do you want to meet me again? But she doesn't dare to do it. So it's like, it's both a power situation.
A struggle between the two of them?
A battle between them. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much.
Other questions out there? Comments?
Over there. Some over there.
Yeah, down here.
If I said what genre do you consider this movie to be, what would you say?
He's asking what genre does Ruben consider the film to be?
But I was looking up in a dictionary what satire means. And I think it was like something that is provocative, elegant, and what was it more? No, but it was something more like that. But
Absurd.
satire, I think I like the word, and I like satire when it comes to the approach. You know, that you're trying to, by being a little bit provocative. I think provocative is a very strong word in English, right? In Swedish, it's not that strong, but if by trying to be provocative in order to raise questions about things and to make us ask questions, and in order to make fun of things that we take for granted, or to attack things with a satire. I like the word satire. I would love that people think it's a satire. I think that some journalists have compared the films a little bit with Buñuel, with Luis Buñuel, that made, for an example, The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, that I think is one of the best film titles ever. It's a beautiful title.
Exterminating angels.
Yeah, but the discreet charm of the bourgeoisie. You understand, he's not going to be nice to these people.
Other last?
There's
yeah.
one over there.
Okay, sir?
You use some classic sociological experiments to stimulate your thinking. I'm wondering whether or not you spend any time actually trying to acquire some additional sociological insights to illuminate your future work.
He's asking, can you say it one more time?
Do you continue your study of sociology to stimulate your thinking
For future projects?
Did everybody hear the question? Yeah. Okay. Yes, I think that every new film that I'm approaching, I think that I try to find something from sociology that is connected to it. And yes, I can talk about something with the next film that is really funny to talk about. You know, my next film is going to be called Triangle of Sadness, and it's about the fashion industry and the beauty industry. And a triangle of sadness is when you have a wrinkle in between your eyebrows because you have had a lot of trouble in your life. But don't worry, you can fix that with Botox in 15 minutes. So that's why it's called Triangle of Sadness. It's super fun. But anyway, you know, the fashion industry, it's interesting when you look, because my wife, she's a fashion photographer. And she has been telling me so many funny stories about the fashion industry. And always when she's like showing the images of these fashion shoots, you know, I get a little bit, you know, why are the models always looking down on the consumer? So the more exclusive the brand gets, the more the model is like, you know, an Ubermensch looking, you know, never looks happy. They always like look with like a steel eye on the consumer. You don't belong here. We are above you. And this is when it comes to the really exclusive brands. But then when you go down and take the brands that is like more like H&M, for example, then the models are smiling. So it's like, welcome to us, you know. And so the whole fashion industry, what I'm most annoyed about it is that it's making money out of our insecureness, our fear of not fitting in, our fear of being excluded from the group. And then I read and study. This is not sociology, but I think it's in the same way that I've just used to study the other studies. And it was a study about zebras. And there was a couple of scientists that wanted to, like, they tried to figure out why are the zebras black and white when they live on the savanna, when they live on this dust yellow savanna. Isn't that really strange, you know? And they started to try to follow one individual in the herd, like study one individual. But it turns out it's super hard to do that. So it always disappears like in the herd. And so what they did then, it was like they sprayed a red dot on the side of one zebra. Okay, now we can follow it, you know. But what happened was that zebra almost immediately got taken by lions. So then maybe all of you thought it was obvious before, but of course the pattern, the black and white pattern, is not to hide in the environment, it's about hiding in the herd. And this study was drawing the parallel to human beings, and that we are so skillful when it comes to like, how should I dress, you know? And I think that we can all identify, oh my God, why is it so horrible to go on the Golden Globe Gala? Because my tie is not, you know, what do you call this? What do you have? Yeah, like it's not correct, it's not sitting right, you know, like everybody is like small children that is going to a birthday party and you're a little bit too well dressed, so no one can play anymore, you know. So everybody will get, so, and I think that as soon as we go to a party, and maybe even more when it's no dress code, but then am I overdressed or underdressed? And we're constantly trying to maneuver so we are dressed on the right level. And this is like we don't want to pop out of the herd, because then we can be exposed. We want to hide in the herd, and that is something that I think is super interesting when it comes to the next film.
And so is Triangle of Sadness actually underway, being scripted as?
Yes, I love pitching the project, and then soon I will write it down.
Well, I think we've come to the end of our time, so we wish you so much good luck in the Oscar race.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.